This is Hans Sloane. He was a physician who sailed through the Bahamas in the early 1700s. He was designated to be the personal physician of the governor of the Bahamas, the Duke of Albemarle, who shortly after his arrival in Kingston died. So Dr. Sloane had a lot of time on his hands. He traveled across the island. Among other things, he collected living iguanas, living boa constrictors, took them back to the UK. He wrote a wonderful natural history of Jamaica. His greatest achievement, at least economically, was to steal the recipe from an anonymous slave woman in the middle of the island who mixed milk with sugar and ground cacao beans and gave it to colicky babies to calm them down. This was what Dr. Sloane used to develop his milk chocolate, Dr. Sloane's patented milk chocolate, which eventually morphed into Cadbury's. And by the time he died, Dr. Sloane had acquired probably the greatest natural history collection in the world, which he bequeathed to the British people. It became the nucleus for the Natural History Museum in London on Kensington Road. A little bit of intellectual piracy there. Sloane wrote this description of the Bahamas as he sailed through. The Bahama Islands are filled with seals. Sometimes fishers will catch 100 in a night. They try, that means melt down the blubber. They try or melt them and bring off their oil for lamps to the islands. The oil was also used to lubricate the sugar mills in the south. A little bit afterwards, the Proceedings of the Government Council of the Bahamas declared that yearly about winter the seals come upon the shores of these islands to breed and are caught. Each yields about 20 gallons of oil. A man named C.R. Nesbitt, over a century later, described how when the seals are asleep, they are usually killed by knocking them on the head with a handspike. The first blow, the seal is apt to be roused, and after that, it's a piece of cake. These animals had no instinctive fear of bipedal predators. They were easy to kill. In 1897, H.L. Ward, an American, wrote about the whole character of the seal being of tropical inactivity, a little bit of northern a sense of superiority there, unwarranted for sure. Upon first approaching them, they appear to have no dread whatsoever of the human presence, lazily looking at us, perhaps uneasily shifting their position. Again, I reiterate that these animals had no real fear of humans. What did these beaches in the Bahamas with all these seals look like? We only have a few photographs of dense populations of seals in situ. This is taken off the Arrecife Triangulos, 1900. This was an expedition that actually killed and removed about 48 seals from museums. And you can see in the upper right, and these pictures can't be resolved more, they're this bad in life. You can see some of the sealers dragging dead seals up onto the beach so they could be skinned. Bobbing heads of seals in the lagoon in F, etc. J.A. Allen described the seals in 1880. He writes, it appears to have reached well-nigh extinction and is doubtless to be found at a few of the least frequented islets. The monk seal, he concluded, is an almost mythical species. Well, how did that happen in a place like the Bahamas where seals were just supremely abundant ones? Here's some of the only decent pictures we have of these animals. The New York Zoological Society kept 3 in 1910. You can see a bit of an idea of their morphology. They published a rather quaint description of these captive seals in their newsletter, describing how one of them was particularly frisky, would take a mouthful of water and then spray it at passersby. It seems they accommodated themselves pretty well to captivity. H.W. Elliott from the Smithsonian in 1884 actually invoked cruising captains going through the islands on fruit boats and for other reasons to detect the presence of seals. The idea being that collectors could come and take skins where they'd be deeply appreciated by museums. Well, the seal went extinct, we know now, in about 1954. But in 1980 and 81, we didn't know that. And this was after my term as director of the National Trust. We managed to, some of us travel through the islands and make a last survey to see whether there were any extant West Indian monk seals. We used this ship, the Regina Maris, which was owned by the Ocean Research and Education Foundation, and took college students all over the world. During this phase of its life, it was following the humpback whales from Greenland down to the Silver Banks off the Dominican Republic. I had published in my book, just better, is that too loud? I had published in my book some observations of living people. This is back in 1977, who had seen seals. Most particular was the Reverend T.S. Wilson of Ragged Island. He told me of monk seals being rather common in the vicinity of Baracoa and Santiago, Cuba in the 1930s. You know, many Ragged Islanders at that time, many men had families as well in Cuba, and a lot of them spoke Spanish. Mr. Wilson called them lobos, lobos del mar, a word that he acquired from his grandfather, George Wilson, who we think was born about 1844. And he regaled his grandson, the man I met, with tales of seeing seals all around Exuma Sound and on the shores of Cad Island, Long Island, the Exuma Keys, likewise called them lobos. So given this information that I'd picked up sort of anecdotally about seals, and some more, I went down to the southern tip of Acklands and found a person there who described herring hogs in her youth. I don't know what a herring hog is. It sounds like it might be a marine mammal, but the descriptor is rather imprecise. Dave Sargent, a marine mammologist from Canada, decided that these anecdotal accounts of seals in the Bahamas merited a sea journey to check them out, to see if there weren't any few vestigial numbers of seals in the southeastern Bahamas. This is a picture of Dave Sargent in front of a palm tree, Pseudophoenix sargentii, the buccaneer palm. It's not named after him. I've got to tell you a bit about this man. He was witty, erudite. He was brilliant to travel with. What a fine companion on a long sea voyage. He was full of wisdom, but he told me one thing which was emphatically wrong. He said, David, life is long. Now, 67 years old, that's lovely, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gates. He said, David, life is long. And at 67, I don't sense that at all. I sense that life is pretty short. And for those youths in this class, in this auditorium, remember that. As you grow older, it seems the years are shorter and shorter. Get things done while you can. Do it. That includes you, Pericles. You've got a trove of information which is absolutely encyclopedic. You need to record it and write it down, sir. Please do. Anyway, we sailed on the Regina Maris over and over again in some cases to all the places listed on the left-hand column. I won't describe them all or point them out to you. But most notably, we got into the Bight of Acklands. We got down to Cay Verde, which is just off the coast of Cuba. That was a bit of an adventure because at the time, the Cubans had a rather testy relationship with the Bahamians. And every day, some American Phantom jets would fly out to check on us twice a day at basically mast top level to see that we hadn't been abducted by the Cubans. I've added in the bottom some of my own observations during my time as trust director when I did record those stories of seals. Captain George Nichols, he was a retired cosmetic surgeon from New England, was the skipper. Some other remarkable people are on this voyage. Next to Nichols is Ken Balcom, and the man with the Panama hat is Dave Sargent, the seal man. Here's a picture of Dave at Hogsty Atoll. We thought that was surely going to be a place where seals might be found. That wreck there, I don't know if it's still there, was of a Yugoslavian freighter that was carrying, among other things, lots of mattresses to Cuba. I used to go down to Matthewtown in those days, and everybody in that town had a brand new soft mattress. It was amazing. Some unoccupied houses were stacked floor to ceiling with mattresses. That island had the best sleeping in the Bahamas because of that. This is, by the way, the only atoll in this part of the world, only true atoll in the Darwinian sense. The Regina was a beautiful ship. She was a barkentine, which meant her foremast was square-rigged. And you had to climb up there and drop the sails and then roll them up afterwards when the wind abated or we were under motor. I was given the ignominious stature as an idler, all the scientists were, which was a way that the working crew could condemn us. And none of us had the dim wits to really be idlers, so we all pitched in and did every job on the ship, including climbing the sails and reaching down into the head when some dimwit plugged it up with a piece of toilet paper. Traveling at sea on this journey was simply indescribable. To go on an old, tall ship through these waters is just one of the magnificent experiences of life. A wooden ship, no less. She was built in 1908 out of oak in Norway. I used to have I liked the job of being on watch. That's where the person in the front with the yellow dungarees is. I was tall, though. I had to be careful because there was a microwave radar up there that would fry my brains if I stretched or managed to elevate my head. One of the more memorable moments when I was on watch was a still night, moonless in Exuma Sound. It was misty, and the lights of the ship were disappearing rapidly over a very short distance. I was up there on watch, and I heard the scuzzing sound. To my horror, it was from the conning tower of a Russian submarine. It was diesel. It was probably charging its batteries. That just cut across our trajectory, missed us by meters. It was gone before I could even shout a warning to the person at the wheel. Very interesting. I doubt the people in the submarine saw us. Here's Ken Balcom photographing a mass booby at Cay Verde. Ken was the principal reason this ship was in motion, making this journey every year from Greenland to the Silver Banks and back. We just hitched a ride to look at monk seals in the Bahamas. He was studying humpbacked whales on the Silver Banks. And I can attest what you've read about with the ancient mariners, is you can actually hear their vocalizations, their songs, through the hull of a wooden ship. You really can. When the diesel was off and everything was still, we were at anchor in the Silver Banks. And if you snorkel among those whales, the songs of the whales seem to go through your body and vibrate your heart and spine. You've got to add it to your bucket list, everybody. Ken was the perfect person, perfect companion on this trip, because he had this indefatigable way of walking for miles with little water in the hot sun, scantily clothed, looking for the remains of marine mammals. He was in particular, that's on Castle Line, you can see the Regina Maris in the background. He had the particular interest then in finding Mesoplodon europaeus, one of the beaked whales down here. Mesoplodon had never, really had hardly been observed in the wild. On one of our voyages, Ken made the first underwater recording of his vocalizations. Quite a treat. Most of the Mesoplodons we saw, however, were on the beaches and decomposing. Ken would spend hours with his assistants dissecting these whales, trying to salvage some bones, doing autopsies. This is what a Mesoplodon skull looks like after Ken worked on it for hours. And the deck of the Regina became a charnel house. It was just covered in whale bones. The bilge on that ship was reachy enough, but with these decomposing whales, it was quite an experience, sensory experience. We did lots of other science. We've extended the ranges of some of the terrestrial fauna on these islands. I won't tell you what island this is for fear a collector might go there, but I know this genus has been changed, but this is the old Alsophus racer. We found a new extension of its range. On the second voyage, Garrett Clow, who's famous for his studies of hutillas on East Planet Key, captured a number of hutillas for transportation to Nassau, but also to Little Wax Cay, where we released them that same voyage. Now, this photo was taken in 1989 of Little Wax Cay, and you can see some of the damage those released hutillas did on the island. The whole place is chewed up. Some of the trees were girdled. The understory was covered in hutilla feces. It really goes to show how muck a native species can be when it doesn't have its predator, which in this case I assume would have been the extinct Tytopollens barn owl. We wrote a paper on that, Mike, my wife, Karen Lowell, and I, on the effect of hutillas on Little Wax Cay's vegetation. Here's a diagram from the paper. We used Highbourn Cay as a control, and you can see in the right two columns, with two transects of Little Wax, how absent canopy cover was. And to put an interesting spin on it, my wife, Karen, there she is, she used to teach at government high school right here. She's a phytochemist. She did a study showing that the plants that the hutillas disdained, in other words, the ones that were dominant on the Key, to a T, all of them had secondary plant substances that had some cytotoxic activity, therefore would be dandy candidates for anti-cancer agents. This is the first time anybody's ever used a rodent as an informant for one of these studies. We've used chimpanzees, we've used bears, lots of humans. We've exploited a lot of humans, like Sloane did that Jamaican slave lady. But this is the first time rodents were ever used. Anything less than 20 on that right column means it's significantly cytotoxic. About 3 more minutes. Just after our expedition, several scholars under the command of Bernie LeBoeuf, University of California, Santa Cruz, did a similar voyage in the Gulf of Mexico and the Eastern Caribbean, all the way down to around the Yucatan to the borderline with Belize. And they published in 1985 this terrible epithet, the West Indian monk seal is extinct. And notice in the second paragraph, they cite the Sargent expedition on the Regina Maris as one of the contributing bits of evidence for this. And I must tell you, when we embarked on that voyage, I was full of optimism. I was young, maybe naive, that we would rediscover the West Indian monk seal, and this would be something the world would celebrate, not to mention the Bahamas. We didn't. Instead, that voyage put the nails in the coffin, one of 2 expeditions that did, sort of definitively, about the extinction of the West Indian monk seal. And it was a tragic denouement, but what a voyage of adventure and discovery. I have loved these islands for almost 70 years. That's how long I've been coming here. But I never truly understood this place, these islands, until I went to all those small keys in the southeast and got a grasp of the full panoply of diversity, geomorphology, etc., that occur in these blessed, lovely islands. Thanks very much.